Deb, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to have this conversation with you. I want to start out just helping everyone here gain a better understanding about Child Trend's work as a nonprofit organization. Our students are learning about a wide range of types of organizations that make up the nonprofit sector, and research organizations usually aren't the first thing to come to mind when people think of nonprofits. So this is a great learning opportunity for us. Can you please share a little bit about Child Trend's mission, your major areas of work, and how you're funded?
Yeah, sure. So Child Trends has been around for just over 40 years, and we are dedicated to using research to improve the lives of children, youth, and families. And so that means that most of our stakeholders are researchers, policymakers, and program providers, those who are working directly with students, children, youth, and their families. What I would say is that children, youth, and families are our beneficiaries, but we don't usually talk to them directly. We do research. We are primarily funded by the federal government, so we're about 2/3 federally funded and about 1/3 other, and that other includes foundation grants, it includes some work for state governments. We really don't operate at all of individual donations. Most of our fundraising is writing towards RFPs. So anything that comes out that has to do with children, youth, and families, if it aligns to our expertise, we will usually respond. We have 5 different program areas of Child Trends. So I am over the youth development, which typically looks at things like after school, out of school time, young adults, and the education sector, which we primarily focus on what I like to term conditions for learning. So we don't do the traditional type of education work like curriculum or teacher prep. We focus on things like school climate and school discipline, school safety, and trying to make sure that schools are good places for kids to be in order for them to learn. We also have divisions focused on reproductive health and family formation. So they do a lot of teen pregnancy prevention work, as well as child welfare. And our biggest program area at Child Trends is our early childhood program area. There's about 70+ staff members that just focus on early childhood. So yeah, that's a little bit about Child Trends, and happy to answer more about it as well.
Cool. So it sounds like, given that you said over 2/3 of your funding comes from government, that government and policymakers are a major stakeholder of Child Trends. And so I think we'd like to learn a bit more about how a nonprofit research organization can influence policymaking in practice. I read online that, and you just mentioned, your team's research agenda focuses on the intersection of education policy and children's healthy social and emotional development. So how is your team's work being used across the sectors of government, business, and nonprofits?
Yeah, so it's an important question. So one thing I like to stress is, in part because we are primarily funded by the federal government itself, we don't engage in lobbying. So there's other 501c3s, some of which have 501c4 arms that engage in direct lobbying efforts. We try to, what we say, inform policy. We don't try to necessarily influence policy. And it's a very important distinction to sort of keep our hands clean of the lobbying line. And so what that means is we do a lot of white papers, putting out resources, doing data analyses to try to put forward what is the evidence on the different things that policymakers are proposing to do, and giving them some advice or information about things that they might want to consider. We don't do things like drafting bills. We don't tend to go and directly give any of this information to legislators. We try to put it out there more broadly to try to influence the world. But that said, we do take opportunities where we get them. So just last year, I was able to testify in front of the Senate committee, I think the Homeland Security Committee of the Senate, that was looking at school safety following the Parkland school shootings. And that I was able to share my research and share what we know. And that is a very important piece of influencing policy. Too much of policy is made without considering what the actual evidence is. And so our mission really is to try to infuse evidence and research into that conversation.
Cool. Yeah, that's super, super important. What about, do you see businesses or industries using your research in different ways?
We do. So we do inform program developers. We often work with program developers to do evaluations of their work to understand whether their work is actually having influence. So we also do evaluations of other nonprofits to understand if they are having the impact that they think they're having, helping them develop logic models, all the good stuff of what you're supposed to do when thinking about what a nonprofit needs to be doing. So both on the nonprofit and for-profit side, we do try to help them understand what they're doing and also give them evidence where they need it to help inform development of different products.
Oh, that's really cool. So I want to shift to some leadership advice for students. You are the leader of a team of, I think, around 40 researchers. But earlier in your career, you were involved in some large-scale and really influential programs at the U.S. Department of Education that raised awareness about bullying in schools. And before I worked at DGI, I was working in education policy. So I remember when stopbullying.gov was launched and when you released teacher trainings on bullying prevention. What were some of the most important lessons that you learned about leadership, both in terms of leading on a cause and leading people from your time at Ed?
So I was put in charge, and I don't necessarily recommend this, but I was my first job out of grad school getting thrown into the U.S. Department of Education, leading the federal interagency group on bullying. And what that meant is it was about, at any given time, 9 different departments, but within those departments, several different sub-agencies or offices within those departments. So we could have upwards of 30 or 40 people trying to come to consensus about what our next steps should be. And so it felt like herding cats in a lot of ways because everyone had their own priorities. Each agency has its own mission. So they are all trying to fit the issue of bullying within what they are doing, what their mission is. And we're all trying to come together to make sure that we're doing it consistently. So what I found the most important thing was never to just throw it open, especially with that many people on a given call. Not having an agenda and not having things for people to react to was never a good idea. So it was always a good idea to come prepared with a couple of different options, being able to defend the pros and cons of each of those options, to have a discussion and then come to some sort of group decision. It's also the recognition that there's never going to be a situation where everyone is happy, but it's about trying to find where no one is so unhappy that they don't want to move forward. So that was another big lesson for me, was trying to make sure that we found solutions that would not damage anyone. Maybe not everyone's happy, but would help push whatever we were doing forward. The other big thing is sometimes decisions just had to be made. There were times when we would go in circles over fairly mundane things. And at some point it just had to be called and said, all right, no, we're going this direction and we just have to call it because we have to get this conference done, or we have to get this invitation out, we have to get the website launched. So it was very important to know when to call that and collect. The one other thing I would say is networking is incredibly important and personal relationships is really important. The only way that I was able to get buy-in from all the people on that call is that they felt like they knew me and they felt like they could have a conversation with me if they felt like I was doing something off the beaten track, and not feel either intimidated by me or like I wasn't going to listen to them. I was always maintained an open door policy, and that's something I still maintain today, as I will talk to you and help you find a solution whenever you need to talk to me.
Cool. Those are some really great leadership and management lessons. Thank you. Fast forwarding now you're a senior leader at Child Trends. What's your approach to leading people in your organization and making change when change needs to happen?
Yeah, so open door policy is the #1 recommendation. I manage a couple different people at this point who are also leaders. So that's the transition from being a director where you're just over sort of one program area. I am now over 2 different program areas, so 2 different directors who are leading their program areas. And they have very different leadership styles. And what I've noticed is that the leaders that are not as successful are the ones who seem a little bit more closed, a little bit more unapproachable, a little bit more hierarchical. I have always tried to prioritize making sure that everyone feels like they have a voice on our team. So even, the brand new, just out of college research assistant can raise concerns, can bring ideas to the table, just as well as, our senior scholar who has been in the field for 30 years. I think that's really important. It's also really important to make sure that you are actually talking to people and getting to know them and getting to know their goals. So I make it a priority about every 6 months or so to have one-on-ones, usually about 20 minutes. In a pre-COVID era, I would take them all out to lunch. Now it's all through Zoom, but at least having a conversation to see what things are going well, get feedback on how I'm doing, what I can be doing to better support them, making sure I know where their goals are so I can prioritize projects and tasks that might fit their goals or fit where they are trying to go. And having that information about my team makes it that much easier for me to go, aha, that's a task that John Smith can take because they are very interested in learning this new skill. And it makes it so that they feel like I'm actually listening to them, which I think is one of the key characteristics of a leader.
Yeah, because you are listening to them. That's great. I hear communication being such a strong value in your leadership. So I want to shift. My last 3 questions are kind of geared around career advice for our students. You're now the Vice President for Youth Development and Education Research at Child Trends. You've established a really impressive career. You're the only guest in our series who has a Wikipedia page. Fun fact.
And a verified Twitter.
What'd you say?
And a verified Twitter, which I was very proud of when I got my verified on Twitter.
It's key. So I'd like to help our students and participants here today better understand your career path into a leadership position at a high impact nonprofit. If you could maybe just shine some light on some of the key decisions that you made and experiences that you've had that have helped shape your career.
Yeah, and I can also talk a little bit of detours that I've taken as well. So the number one thing is don't be afraid to talk to people. So if you meet me sort of not in a professional capacity, but in a social capacity, I am one of the shyest people you will ever meet. Like, I don't like to approach people. Networking creeps me out. Like, I force myself to do it, but it's not necessarily one of my strongest skill sets. Because I am very much an introvert. I am very much socially anxious. Like, that's not who I am. But what I learned very early on is putting yourself out there is really important, because you never know who's going to actually set your career in motion. And what happened with me is I went to a conference when I was in grad school. So I went straight undergrad into a PhD program. So I was fairly young. I had just finished my master's degree. So I did master's en route to my PhD. And I went to a conference and I heard Kevin Jennings, who is then the Assistant Deputy Secretary at the Department for Office of Safe and Drug-Free Schools, speak. And he was talking about all the things that I was studying. I was so enamored with everything he was saying that I somehow got over my shyness, went up to him and said, "Hi, I'm Deborah. I'm studying bullying and getting my PhD. Please let me work for you." And federal government doesn't really work where you can just go and take a job. But he said, "Well, I can't really just hire you, but you can come do an unpaid internship." I said, "All right, great. I will move down to DC for a summer. I'll take an unpaid internship." My graduate advisor wasn't too thrilled, but said, "All right, go, it's fine." And I ended up staying. So he ended up making a job for me, figuring out how to actually get me hired through the bureaucracy to stay at the department for the next 3 years. While I finished my PhD. So it was only because that I went up to Kevin and asked him for a job, and he, being the amazing person he is, said, "Sure, why not come work for me?" That my career got in motion. I don't think I would be nearly where I am if he hadn't said yes at that point. So you never know who's going to say yes. So I was at the department for 3 years. Kevin left about 2 years into that. So I had about a year after Kevin left with a new director. And the new director came in right as I was, sort of flying, doing a lot of great things at the department, getting recognized for my work, sort of externally as well as internally. And he didn't like that very much. He didn't like the fact that a 26-year-old was outshining the new director of this office. And he tried to put me in my place, which looking back, I was a little bit of a cocky 26-year-old, but also was not thrilled with realizing that he wasn't going to let me do all the things I had been doing for the last 3 years. So I made the very rash decision to just jump as soon as I found a different opportunity. So I went to a nonprofit at that point. They were like, yeah, we want to do bullying prevention. Sure, come work for us. I went into that job going, all right, this will be fine. You know, they're doing what I want. Their mission is what I want to do. My big piece of advice is, even if a nonprofit is doing what you want to do, it has a mission that aligns to your personal mission, that's all great, but make sure you know what the nonprofit does and know the environment and the context that you're going into. So I went in and found out that they wanted to do bullying prevention, in part because they thought it was going to be a fundraising mechanism. So they didn't actually think that they wanted to do bullying. They had a lot of different things that sort of were outspurts of their mission, mostly because they were chasing money. So I'm sure you guys are learning in your courses right now that you don't chase money. You have to make sure that mission and money align. They were chasing money. And it was very clear when I went in that that's what they were trying to do. So I felt like they were co-opting something I was very passionate about just to try to get money, which wasn't great. And I was also at that time, coming out of 3 years of very visible high-level leadership, wanting to be advanced quicker in my role. They refused to give me a director title at that point and said, well, and when I called them on it, they said, well, you would need 30 years of experience here to have a director title. And meanwhile, I think I was like 28. And I said, well, I'm not even 30 years old, so I don't know how I'm supposed to have 30 years of experience. So it took me, so I jumped into that position. I went and I decided, well, I'm just going to stick this out and find the position that I'm going to fit. So I spent 1.5 years there, but most of that time was trying to find my out, and ended up with several different job offers, all at the same time. So one other piece of advice is, it took me 1.5 years to get a job offer, but it poured. As soon as I got one job offer, I got 3 more. So I had to make a choice between 4 different positions, and Child Trends was one of them. And Child Trends from the beginning told me, our director of education is about to retire. We are looking for someone to quickly assume that position. We believe in you. We want to invest in you. We want to grow you. And that was sort of like, okay, they actually see where I want to go. They see where my trajectory is. They believe I can do this. So even though I had been out of research and out of academia for a little bit at that point, I was able to jump back in and quickly take on that director role. I served in that director role, moving from a director to a senior director at some point, for 5 years, and then jumped into the VP role this year.
Wow, that's a really enlightening story. Thanks for sharing that. A lot of great lessons in there. As you mentioned, the importance of putting yourself out there and taking a chance, never knowing who's going to help make your career or open the door for you. And what you said about joining an organization that you're excited about, and then maybe not having enough experience to really evaluate how the organization operated or what its values were, that really resonates with me. I've had an experience like that. I know what that's like. It's really tough. But sounds like you landed in a great spot at Child Trends. So even after becoming an international expert on school climate and bullying, social emotional development, you already have a PhD. You're in a senior director role at Child Trends, and then you decided to come join us at the University of Maryland and get your certificate in nonprofit management and leadership. What drove this decision? And I think a lot of people wrestle with the decision of like, I want to advance my career, but I don't know if I should just find a new job or if I should go back to school. What drove your decision? What would you tell someone who's grappling with this?
Yeah, so about 3 years into being at Child Trends, my boss, who's the chief operating officer, came in my office and sort of nonchalantly told me that she wanted to groom me for her job because she was plotting to take over the world. And so that sort of scared me, made me a little anxious, and go, okay, well, I don't know how to do your job. I know how to do research. I know a little bit about policy. I don't know about a thing about management. Like I can take the cues, I can follow the lead of, Kevin Jennings, who was my mentor, and try to meet people where they are, but I don't know about, I don't know about what it takes to actually run a nonprofit. And so wanted to feel like I could get a little bit more information, and figured the best way to do that was to get more education. And I wrestled for a bit of, should I go back and get an MBA, or should I maybe just spend a year and see where things are? And that's what I ended up doing, was spending the year to get the certificate. And I think it was a very good move, because it helped me realize how much I already know. It also helped me learn some really good tips and skills like strategic planning, which I had not ever really thought about the actual process of setting strategy. So that was very, very helpful for me to actually be trained on something that I was sort of expected to do already, but didn't know what I was doing. So that was how my decision was made. Looking back, I probably could do my job having not done it, but having done the certificate has put me in a position of actually understanding why, and having different tools in my tool belt, which I think is the key to being successful, is always being able to pivot and try something else. And having those tools and having that knowledge of what is available and the different strategies you can take has been incredibly helpful. Just as an example of that, this year, with COVID, we've had to shift a number of different strategies, and we've had to figure out how to be strategic very quickly in light of all the changes that COVID has brought. So, shutting down our offices, meaning that, we can't, one thing to know about our business model is that we charge by the hour. We're kind of like lawyers. So we, all of our time has to get charged to projects. And so the free time used to, do professional development or do other sorts of non-project activities is very limited. And it's even more limited this year because of COVID. And so being able to figure out how do we still be strategic within those limitations has been invaluable. So that's sort of why I went back and did this. I will also note, I am still only 35. My co-VPs are older than I am. And so I also wanted to make sure that I was coming in with something to make up for the fact that I may not have as many years of experience, but I certainly have the knowledge to support my being in this role.
Yeah, cool. So it sounds like it was really validating, getting the certificate, and I'm glad to hear that you've been able to apply some of the things that you learned as well. That's great. Okay, my last question. You've been involved in some really influential, cutting-edge work, and I believe it's work that you're passionate about, that has a potential to make a real difference for people. And you've also, as we've talked about, been really successful in your career. What advice could you share with students who want to do well professionally, but also make a big impact on the world?
Yeah, so, I think it's sort of the stereotype that you go into nonprofit and you don't make a lot of money. But I think there are ways to do both if that is your goal. I will say money has never been sort of my driving factor. I've always wanted to have as much impact as I can in my life. And so I've sought out roles where I could be visible, where I would be able to have a voice, where I would be able to drive some important decisions. And I think those roles are out there. You just have to go and look for them. The other thing that I would really strongly encourage, especially as you are coming out just new to the working world, is to both be open to new experiences and be open to taking on different roles and admitting when you make a misdirection, like I did when I got out of government, and making sure that you feel comfortable on your career track, because that's where you're going to be happiest. I would also say that you should also be comfortable with self-advocating. If you feel like nothing is going to get handed to you, you have to ask for things. So you have to feel comfortable with saying, no, I am able to do this job. I am able to take on this higher role. I am able to have more of a voice and advocate for that. So we all are self-doubt. I have imposter syndrome every single day. But outwardly, I don't present my imposter syndrome. I say, no, I am the expert. I can do this. I absolutely know what I'm doing. And that's what's going to help you advance, is being that confident and that sure. I would say that's also true when you're looking at job descriptions. So if you're looking at something that says, oh, you need 2 to 3 years of experience in all these different things, and we want the perfect person for this role. I can tell you, as someone who hires a lot, we never get a perfect person in that role. So if you are looking at a job description and being like, well, I don't fit like 2 of these things on this long list of 20 things they want in this candidate, I'm not going to apply. That is a misdirection. Absolutely send in your resume. Absolutely send in a cover letter that is full out self-advocating. This is why I am the right choice. I would say, though, in your cover letter, never say I am the perfect candidate, or because you never know who else is in that stack, and it's a little bit of a cliche. So if you take one piece of advice for your cover letter, don't say I am the perfect candidate for you. You don't know that. So don't say that in your cover letter.
Cool, thanks. I think that's really valuable advice. All right, well, that wraps up our interview.